What are you going to ask me?
Well, first, I'd like you to tell us all who you are, Boomer.
Who I am?
Yeah, tell us who your name, when you were born, and where you were born.
I'm Marilyn Grant. I was born April 19th, 1924 in Providence, Rhode Island.
Uh-huh. And
April 18th?
April 9th.
Oh,
19th is my birthday, yep. And I was the middle child. My mother had 3 older children and then me. And I went to live with my grandma when I was born for 5 years. And she was the biggest inspiration of my life.
your grandmother.
Yep, because when she was just a young woman, her husband that she was very much in love with was killed in a accident building a highway. And she was left with 2 little boys and pregnant with my mother.
Wow.
And so she had to put her little boys in an orphanage because they didn't have any help for people without insurance or any money. And so she put her little boys in an orphanage.
Wow.
And raised my mother by working in a cotton mill.
Working in a cotton mill.
Right.
So.
And her name was Caroline Adeline Collins, Cullins.
That's beautiful.
To me, she was the most beautiful woman in the world.
Wow.
I loved her, and I think I still, because I went to live with her, I didn't love my mother as much, because I bonded with her.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was 5, I had to go live with my mother. My grandmother and I both went to live with my mother, and my mother separated us. She made my grandmother go up and sleep in the attic, and then she made me sleep downstairs. And maybe she thought we were too close, and she was jealous or whatever, I don't know.
Wow.
So I cried so much that night that I got a real terrific spanking.
And you were
from my
only
mother.
5?
Yeah, because I was keeping everybody awake, screaming and crying for my grandma, who was up on the 3rd floor.
Oh.
And my mother strapped my legs good, yelling and making me stop crying. Yeah. And the next day she said she looked at my legs and saw she'd bruised my legs. And she said, "Don't tell your grandmother, tell your grandmother you fell on the stairs."
Oh my gosh.
So she didn't want my grandmother to be so mad for hurting me.
Yeah. She would be mad.
Yeah.
So how long did you live there?
My grandmother and I lived there until I was a teenager, and then my grandmother and mother didn't get along. They fought like cats and dogs. So my grandmother by then she was getting an old age pension.
Mm-hmm.
So she got a little apartment, and I went to stay with her in her apartment. I was working at the 5 and 10 cent store.
Not the 99-cent store, the
No,
5
5
and
and
10.
10 cent store.
5 and 10 cents.
Woolworth store. It was the big chain of the
They
town.
were fun. Didn't they have counters to eat at?
Yep, they did. Yep. But I worked in the candy department, which was a mess for the poor store owners because I ate a lot of the profits.
Oh.
Like free candy.
Wow.
I wasn't supposed to be eating it.
Wow.
Cute.
So my first job was my first job was in working in a soda fountain, making sundaes and sodas.
Huh.
And I was hired by the man because I was a high school student, and he thought that I was a good-looking young girl, and he thought it would bring the boys
Well, he
in.
was
Boys
right.
from the
The
school,
boys
yeah.
would come in
Smart
from
man.
the school, and well, after a few weeks, the boys didn't come in.
Oh.
Oh.
I lost that job.
You didn't work very long there?
No, a couple of weeks. Well, he was looking for my youth and attractiveness to.
Well, you can't. He might have been looking for something else.
That's true too. You never know what that was
When
like.
somebody sort of behaves that way, maybe.
But it was Depression years, and we watched that program last night on the Dust Bowl. And
Uh-huh.
that
I
brought
watched
back
part of that too.
a lot
Oh,
of
my
memories of the
goodness.
Depression, even though we didn't have the Dust Bowl, and how poor we were, and how we were hungry at times, and how my mother struggled for so long. She went 6 months without being able to pay the rent.
But you guys made it through.
We made it through, and when she finally got a job, she paid that landlord every back cent. Took her about 3 years. She paid the rent, and then she paid him a few bits on the other.
Wow.
Because there was a saying back then, we were poor but proud. In other words, we didn't want anything for nothing. We wanted to earn our way, and we weren't looking for handouts. And And, but of course, when they had the old age pension, my grandmother was glad to get it. But they didn't have welfare.
Right.
So nobody got any help. But we did get free food. They had during the Depression in the 30s, they had the Surplus Commodities Act. And that meant that they'd have the farmers overproduce things, and then they'd bring them to poor areas and let the poor people come and have free food.
That's
And so
good.
we got free blocks of cheese, we got bags of grapefruit, we got oranges from Florida, we got whatever was
What
in
was that
surplus.
program called?
The Surplus Commodities Act.
And they just had whatever was extra and gave it away.
Yeah. And then they paid farmers, they paid them not to plant certain things and others. The government
And
was
to
really
plant
taking
certain.
over in a lot of ways. And that was under President Roosevelt, who was my hero, and a lot of the people in my town, he was a hero. Because he saved us from that terrible time.
Yeah.
They mentioned that in the program
Yeah.
too.
And the thing is that my town was, the only industry was jewelry manufacturing and silver manufacturing. Well, when there's a depression, nobody can afford either,
Jewelry.
or silver.
Yeah.
They can't afford buying stuff like that. So the factories all across the area shut down. There was nothing you could do to work. You couldn't get a job.
Because the whole town was based on that.
Well, yeah, because
And then
that
the
was-
restaurants were slow because nobody had money to spend in them.
Yeah, of course. They
All
shut
the
down.
all the businesses were slow, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was not an easy time. And yet it wasn't a bad time to be a teenager.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it wasn't a bad time. We had a wonderful high school. And I had the same friends from second grade all through school. I still have one I correspond with
Mm-hmm.
on emails. Her name is
Wow.
Drew, and she's in Tucson, Arizona.
Hmm.
And so,
Not many of us can say that, huh?
yeah. Well, I lost touch with her a long time ago because she remarried, and I didn't know her new name.
Oh.
And I knew I heard she married a college professor and was living in Tucson, Arizona.
Uh-huh.
And when I used to work the Arizona State Fair with Les, I used to do the shows, the leather shows. I used to see these redhead freckled ladies go by that were my age,
Yeah.
and I'd say any one of them could have been Gert.
Yeah. And then how did you
Well,
find
my
one
son
of them?
Eddie found her on the internet. All he did was
Oh.
look up the class of 42 from high school.
Oh,
Wow.
smart.
Dumb me. I never thought of that.
Oh. How thoughtful.
So anyway,
Well, then what happened with so what happened in high school? You worked at the shop.
I had two jobs. I worked in the cafeteria to
Uh-huh.
get a free meal. I got a free lunch by working in the cafeteria.
I'll give it to you after.